Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode. I'm so excited to have you here. And I want to tell you something really exciting before we start. Doors are open to my membership, the Quitter Club, for the last time. It's very bittersweet for me to say that, but I want you to be aware that this is the last opportunity. If you've wanted to work with me in any capacity, if you want to get coaching, if you want to create a strategy for your career, now is the time. I am closing the Quitter Club at the end of 2025, and this is a final access pass. It's the last 7.5 months where we will dive deep together. It is going to be the best 8 months of the club because I am bringing everything, all of my new frameworks, some special guests. We're doing a boot camp to beat burnout. There's going to be a lot of live coaching and live classes. You also have access to all of the past stuff, all of the curriculum in the Quitter Club. And so if you've been holding out, now is the time, my friends. Doors are going to close in about a week, and I don't want you to miss this opportunity to get access to coaching for probably the most affordable price point that you're going to have to work with me. If you've wanted to work with me, now is the time. So you can go to quitterclub.com/enroll and make sure that you take this small step to changing your career and changing your life. And that is what we're talking about today. The topic that I wanted to talk about, I think, fits in nicely with this decision that you might have in order to join the club. And it's the way that you can make massive change in your life. And that is through micro decisions and micro steps. I think that we have this false belief that there needs to be big, dramatic, sweeping changes in our lives, right? Where we have to completely start over or we have to burn everything down and, start fresh. And I can tell you now, after coaching hundreds of people, that might be the worst way to do it. And it might be the most stressful way when you have these kind of big Hollywood moments where you think you have to burn everything to the ground. For most of us, we're not built to be able to deal with that level of stress. And the stress of what we have done outweighs then like the, new beginning or the ability to kind of think about what we want to do from there. I think that from what I've seen from my own life, from the people that I've coached, that so many more things are possible if you break it down into small steps. You are so much more likely to actually stick with it, to actually make the change if you don't make it this big, overwhelming thing. And so I know that my podcast is called Lessons from a Quitter, and I talk about quitting, and I think people think that this has to be some big, grand, sweeping thing, and it never does. And in fact, I don't recommend that you do it that way. And so I want to talk to you today about how these micro decisions can really be the secret to big life changes, to big changes in your life, okay? The first thing that I want to talk about is just this myth of having a big life-changing decision. I think that again, there's these like Hollywood fantasies, these movies we're used to. It sounds wonderful where it's like, I'm making this big sweeping change. And for anybody that is unhappy in their life, it can be attractive to think about it like that. It can be like, you want a reset button and you want to start completely over. And I think a lot of us sometimes do that. We move to a different city or a country. We might change all of our relationships because we think I need really big change in order to get out of feeling the way that I am. But the thing is that most of the time, a lot of those changes, even the ones that seem like they're big and bold, are a series of tons and tons of small, unsexy, boring decisions that lead the person to there, right? And I think we see this big moment and we think that just happened in a flash, but that rarely, if ever, is the case. And I actually, again, like I said, I think that actually creates so much more stress that it does more harm than it does good. Something that I think you should be aware of is what in, psychology is called a narrative fallacy. Our brain, when you're looking in hindsight, they say hindsight's 20/20. And when we are looking backwards, it's very easy to connect the dots. It's very easy to create a narrative, to create a story. And our brain loves to do this, where it's almost like you jump over a lot of things and it's like, oh, I had this, big exciting story of how I quit my job as a lawyer and got to where I am. And it's easy to do that looking back, but it's a fallacy because that's not how it happened. So I can tell you with my own story, when I tell it on a podcast or if I'm being interviewed, well, of course, I want to skip through a lot of the boring stuff. And so a lot of the big moments do sound as though they're very big, sweeping, like light bulb ahas. Oh, I have to leave my job. I hate being a lawyer, and I'm going to quit and whatnot. I try to be really conscious of this because I never want to make it seem like that, because it wasn't like that for me. But a lot of times it does look like, okay, I quit my job in the law. I tried entrepreneurship with a photo booth business. It didn't work out in the way that I wanted, but I learned a lot. And then I started this podcast and I created this business, and it's been rainbows and butterflies. And that is condensing 10 years of 1 million decisions down into like a 30-second, clip. And I think that unfortunately with social media, that is a lot of what we get. You get a lot of these 30-second reels because they're hooks and they keep people kind of addicted, and they keep people on your site. But it's never what the actual thing is, right? And I've talked about that a lot on the podcast. I've talked that a lot in my community about how many decisions for me it has taken to get to where I am, and how many decisions I was really unsure of, and how many times I failed and kept pivoting, and how that has gotten me to where I am. And so I want you to realize that for all of us, whatever decision you're making is not one big decision. It's a bunch of little decisions that you have to make, right? And I think that this is actually can be a really empowering concept once you learn it, because you never have to upend everything. You never have to take really big risks that are super scary, that might put you at financial risk or at risk of losing a lot of things. You really can take things kind of slowly, and you can really look at like how many steps are there going to be before I have to make maybe a big financial risk or whatnot. So like if you think about quitting your job, let's say, that's not one decision. It's not one decision that's like, oh, I'm just going to go in and quit. It's a lot. It's like doing therapy or coaching and getting your mind right. It's updating your resume. It's having conversations with maybe your higher ups or your coworkers. It's having conversations with your spouse and really understanding where you're at. It's getting your finances in order. It's looking into, other jobs and networking. And there's so many other things that go into like getting to the place. Like when you actually go in to quit, you've already hopefully been doing a lot of this work for a very long time. It's not as though you go in guns blazing and it's like, I can't work here, I'm out. Usually when people quit that way, not the best. Not the best, because you have nothing lined up. You haven't really thought about it. You hadn't talked to your spouse about it. You just kind of went in and made a rash decision. And so I know that for me, when I quit the law and I talk about this, like it took me a whole year to admit to myself that I wanted to quit the law. I had so many conversations with my husband, with my parents, with my friends, with people in the law, with people outside of the law. I did so many informational interviews. I read so many blogs. I looked up so many other people that had left the law. I had spent so much time thinking about this, and each one of those was a decision. Having each one of those conversations was a decision. Compiling other people's stories was a decision. All of those things were little things that kind of helped me get to the point where I wanted to make the decision to actually quit. In my business, the same thing. It's not as though I started this podcast and it's like, I put it out on social media and everything took off. I started the podcast and did interviews for an entire year without ever selling anything, right? And then I started learning about coaching, and I decided to sign up for a coaching program. And then I, sold one program that was like a group program. And it was just all of these kind of micro decisions over and over and over and over again until it created what I have today. And I have seen this over and over again, not only with like the people that I coach, but when I started this podcast and I was doing interviews, and I was mostly interviewing people that were quitting, that had quit and made big life transitions. Every interview I did, the reason I wanted to do those interviews is because I wanted people to see that everyone's journey was like that. It was never like a linear, I just made a decision, I started this other business, and I just became successful at it, right? It was like a million back, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I didn't know what I wanted to do here. I, met this person, then I went and did this, and I did an, internship for that, and then I learned this. And it's always these like millions of decisions that lead you there. And so I want you to understand that like this myth that there is one big decision that you have to make is just that. It's a myth. It doesn't work that way. And so we can kind of get that out of our head. The second thing I want you to realize with like making these small decisions, why it's preferable beyond the fact that it doesn't add undue stress to you is that it helps you build trust with yourself. Okay. And one of the hardest things for a lot of us is that we have eroded our own self trust. And we've done that in a number of ways. One is that we have listened to what other people want for us and we've ignored what we want. So, like, we have that deep pit in our stomach. We have that kind of intuitive hits that saying, like, this isn't right. I don't want this, or I shouldn't be in this situation, or I don't want to be in this relationship. And we keep ignoring it. And what we do when we ignore that is that we have eroded kind of trusting ourselves because we're like, well, I don't listen to my own voice. I listen to what other people say, right? And oftentimes we get to the place where we're like, I'm in a place where I don't want to be. And I got here because I listened to what everybody else said. And that is not a great place to be. And that's okay. We all do it because we've all been sort of programmed in a society that told us to listen to teachers and listen to our parents, and we don't know, and other people know better. And so sometimes it takes relearning and rebuilding that self-trust of like, I do know what's best for me, or I do know what to do next. And so I think that when you feel really overwhelmed with a transition or something, a decision that you have to make, I think that oftentimes it's because you're looking at the next 10 steps, you're looking at 100 steps. And it's not to say that you never can plan. Of course, sometimes you want to plan and you want to have a lot of steps that you have to look at, sure, but you can only take one step at a time. And I think a telltale sign when you are feeling overwhelmed is that you are trying to do too many things. You're trying to look at too many things. And so part of it is shrinking it back to being like, what is the next step? What is one step that I can take here? What is one step that isn't as scary, right? That doesn't take everything, that I don't need to know all the answers for. I just need to know the answer for this. And the more you do it, not only does it become manageable, not only does it become doable and you actually get into action, but you start building trust with yourself, right? You start seeing like, okay, I took this tiny action and I did it. I can handle this, right? You teach yourself, I can handle that. You strengthen that neural pathway. Like, I can figure this out. I figured this step out. Now it's just the next step I just have to figure out. I don't have to know the whole path. I don't have to know how all of this goes. I just need to know like what's next, right? This is like when you look at any type of study or any type of behavioral science on like habits, like this is what they teach is micro steps, because the more you build, instead of, we all want the dream of like, in 3 months, I'm a different person. I'm all of a sudden organized. I wake up in the morning. I work out every day. I never procrastinate. But that's not reality. That's not how your brain works. And so if you can slow down and decide, like, can I just make these tiny habits? Can I make this one decision? Can I make one decision for today without putting the pressure of like, I have to do this now every single day for the rest of my life, right? When you start doing that, you build that trust with yourself that like, okay, I am this person that now, wakes up early every day, or I'm this person that woke up early today. Look, I can do it, right? And so I want you to really think about what is one decision that you can make right now to move yourself forward on some kind of transition that you want to make. You don't have to have a whole career change. You don't have to launch that whole business. You don't have to, change the whole relationship. But what is one thing? Can you reach out to one person? Can you watch one webinar? Can you, spend 10 minutes journaling? Can you put out that one Instagram post? What's one thing that you can start doing that can take you to the next step? It doesn't have to take you all the way to the final, the finish line. It just has to take you one step closer. And that leads me to the final point about this. I think that we don't realize how much these micro decisions, these small steps, can cause huge transformation. I think we think that we need a huge step for huge transformation, and it couldn't be further from the truth. It's this thing called the compound effect. I've talked about this forever, but I will always tout Darren Hardy's book, The Compound Effect, because it fundamentally shifted how I thought about my life and what I do in my life and how I take these steps. But when you think about these little micro steps that you're taking, it's not just taking one after another. It snowballs, right? So part of what happens is that when you start taking little steps towards things, you allow your identity to change. What I mean by that is like when you start, let's say you wake up one day early, or you start going hard and you want to wake up every day at 5 a.m. Okay. When we set a goal, that's what we do. You go like 3 days, then you kind of give up. When you start doing this thing where you do like a little, let's say instead of at 7 a.m., you want to start waking up now like at 6:45. You're just taking a little bit of a step to wake up earlier. When you start doing that and you can actually stick to it, because it's not as big of a step, it's not as like you're not going from waking up at 8 a.m. to waking up at 5 a.m. You're going from 8 to 7:45, let's say. It starts becoming a natural thing. Like, yeah, I'm just someone that wakes up at 7:45. And then you can move it to 7:30, right? Then you move it to 7:15. Let's just say as an example. You start shifting the thing as like, I am somebody who gets up at 7:30, right? You may not have that belief consciously, but we create beliefs about who we are and what we do. And oftentimes when you give yourself enough time to do things in little steps, you allow your identity to shift with that. You allow yourself to see like, oh, I'm somebody that does this consistently over time, right? I think that when you look at goal setting, one of the reasons that when you reach a goal, it doesn't actually feel as great as you think it will is because the person you were when you picked that goal, like it seemed impossible. But part of getting a goal is going through that journey of becoming that person that does that. So by the time you do it, it's not as hard as it's not as big of a deal. So let's say if you want to run a marathon, when you haven't run at all and you think about running 26 miles, it sounds insane and you think it's going to be like the biggest high of your life. But you spend months and months and months and months and months training, right? Making a bunch of little decisions. The decision not to sit on the couch, the decision to go for the run, the decision to come back to stretch, to go get maybe a sports massage so that you don't lock up, to sit in the sauna for 30 minutes, to eat a certain food. Like you're making all of these tons of micro decisions. And then you become a person that becomes a runner over that time, right? You become that identity of the person that does that. And so by the time you get there, it's not as, unfathomable to you because you're doing it. And so you have become this person. And so it's a little bit bittersweet, but it's because you got the thing you wanted, right? You became not just that you crossed the finish line, but you became that person. And I've seen this over and over again with my own life and with the people that I coach. And one of the reasons that I'm such a stickler for picking one goal throughout a year is because I think that you can pick these goals where you take small action over time so you actually stick to it. Instead of getting super overwhelmed because you want to take these huge sweeping things and you get stressed out, you're taking little steps towards the thing that you want to do. And that compounds and snowballs and becomes bigger and bigger, and you become a different person, right? And those changes create these massive transformations in your life. They become, maybe it doesn't happen overnight or in a month or 3 months. Maybe it takes a year or 2 years or 3 years, but that time passes. And in that time, you've taken a million baby steps, a million little steps, and it becomes this like compound interest, right? It becomes this thing that exponentially pays off. So you may not see the result on day 10, but you see the result on day 400, right? And it becomes a game changer. And so I want you to really think about how you're approaching whatever change it is in your life that you want. If you want a new job, if you want a new relationship, if you want to have hobbies in your life, if you want exercise, you want to feel a certain way in your body, I want you to think about like, how can I break that down into a bunch of micro decisions, into a bunch of smaller things that I have to just do today that are not as hard? That is like a minimum baseline of like, okay, can I just move it up 15 minutes? Can I go for a 15-minute walk instead of trying to go for 2 hours? Can I reach out to one person instead of having a whole list of like reaching out to 30 people on LinkedIn? Can I do small things to prove to myself like, hey, I can do this. It's not as hard as I thought, and it is making a difference. One of the harder things is getting yourself to kind of stick with something when you don't see the results with this, right? So part of this is seeing that like, even if I only reach out to one person, that does make a difference. And so you have to work on your mindset about it. You have to keep your brain in this idea of like, these big life changes, these big like sweeping changes that I think I'm supposed to do are actually what's going to get me to quit. And so how can I just stick with the small stuff? How can I stick with a small step here, a small step there? How can I build that self-trust? How can I change my concept so that I can actually go after the thing that I want? Okay. So I want you to just, like I said, the exercise I want you to do is pick one small step that you can take towards the change you want, right? The last thing I will say about this is that for most of us, there's no way for us to know the whole path. There's no way to know all the steps. If you want to start a business, if you want to write a book, if you want to become a speaker, if you want to change your job, you want to make more money, you want to get married, whatever it is. There is no way for you to know how is this going to look the whole way. What is every pitfall? How am I going to, there's no way until you do it. And I think for a lot of us when we are wanting to make a big change, we want to know the whole plan. We want to know how it's going to go. And if you're waiting for that, you're going to wait forever. And so part of learning to accept and really embrace micro decisions is like, okay, how can I know the next step? That's it. What if it's okay that I don't know how it's going to go. It's okay that I don't know where it's going to go. It's okay that I don't even know if it's going to go anywhere. But how can I take one step and then figure out the next one? It becomes so much more doable when you only have to figure out the next decision and the next and the next, instead of overwhelming yourself with figuring out the whole plan, okay? So you don't have to change your whole life today. You just have to take one micro step, one micro decision, and then another and another. And each day you can give yourself time to catch up, to take the next one. None of it has to be these big sweeping changes, right? And if you want help with that, I want you to join me in the Quitter Club, because this is like really my bread and butter. This is what I help you do, is kind of figure out how do we break things down so that we get out of this mindset of like all or nothing, really big, whatever. How do we kind of break it down to like, what are some manageable things that I'm actually going to stick with, that I'm actually going to do, so I can actually start seeing change, okay? So if you want to join the Quitter Club for this last run, you can go to thequitterclub.com/enroll and join us for the next 7 months. I can't wait to kind of dive into this work and help you all make these micro decisions and take these micro steps so that you can start making really big changes in your life. All right, my friends, I hope this was helpful, and I will see you next week.